I thought I kept going to his house for our friendship, until the day his mother looked at me and said, "Stay for me instead." And in that moment, everything I believed about love, loyalty, and desire began to unravel. I never used to notice the small things about her. At least, that's what I tell myself now. Maybe I was just too young, too distracted, too focused on my own world to pay attention. But that day, something shifted, subtle, quiet, nothing dramatic, yet it has stayed with me ever since. I remember walking into their house like I had 100 times before. Same doorway, same hallway, same familiar scent of brewed coffee and fresh flowers she kept on the dining table. But when she greeted me that afternoon, I felt it, something warm, almost magnetic, pulling gently at the edges of my awareness. She smiled in that soft, effortless way she always did. Not loud, not attention-seeking, just gracious. A smile that made you feel acknowledged, not observed. Her hair was loosely tied back, a few strands falling near her cheek, and she brushed them away with a quiet grace I had never really studied before. But now, for reasons I couldn't explain, I found myself watching the movement of her hand, the gentleness in her fingers, the calm in her eyes. I shouldn't have, but I did. When my friend went upstairs to grab something, I stayed behind in the kitchen with her. The house was unusually quiet. No TV, no footsteps, just the slow hum of the fridge and the soft clink of porcelain as she poured coffee into 2 cups. She handed me one, and as her fingers brushed mine, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the drink. "Long night?" she asked, noticing the tiredness on my face. I chuckled awkwardly. Something like that. Her attention lingered, not in a bold way, but in a way that made me feel seen. Really seen. More than I was used to. More than I expected. I didn't know how to handle that. So I looked away, pretending to focus on a calendar pinned to the wall. She didn't fill the silence with noise. She let it breathe, and somehow that made the moment feel even closer. When my friend returned, everything snapped back to normal. Laughter, small talk, video game plans, the easy rhythm of routine. But I wasn't fully present. Part of me stayed behind in that kitchen, replaying the small, insignificant seconds that suddenly felt significant. Later, when it was time to leave, she stood by the doorway, thanking me for coming by. That same gentle smile, that same calm presence. I walked out, but something in me didn't walk out with me. On the ride home, I kept telling myself it was nothing, a misunderstanding of my own thoughts, a trick of a tired mind. She was just being kind. I'd known her for years. She was my best friend's mother. End of story. But that night, lying in bed, I caught myself remembering the scent of her perfume, the sound of her voice, the warmth of her touch. And that's when I realized I wasn't thinking about my friend anymore. I was thinking about her. After that day, I started noticing things I had somehow ignored for years. The way her presence softened a room. The way her laughter felt warm instead of loud. The way her eyes paid attention, not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. But I never admitted that to myself. I just kept showing up at my friend's house like I always did. Except now, I was aware. One weekend afternoon, my friend got caught up in a long phone call in his room, leaving me downstairs. I wandered into the kitchen, and there she was, quietly drying dishes, sunlight settling over her like a soft layer of gold. She looked up, surprised but not startled, and offered that same gentle smile. "You don't always have to disappear when he does," she said lightly, without accusation. "You can keep me company." I laughed under my breath. "I didn't want to bother you." "You don't." Simple words, but something in the way she said them made my chest tighten. She handed me a dish towel and motioned toward the plates. We worked side by side at the counter, not talking much at first, just the sound of water, porcelain, and distant chatter from upstairs. It was domestic, ordinary, and yet I felt more present than I had in a long time. When we finally did speak, the conversation flowed with surprising ease. Books she'd read, music she missed, places she once wanted to visit. I wasn't just listening to her voice. I was listening to her life, and she listened back. When I spoke about my goals, my restlessness, my uncertainty, she didn't brush it off like most adults did. She didn't talk at me. She talked with me. There were moments she paused, really paused, before responding, as if she wanted to choose the right words instead of the fastest ones. At one point, she reached for a plate at the exact moment I did. Our fingers touched, light, brief, unplanned. But the awareness that shot through me was instant. I pulled back a little too quickly, trying to play it off, but she just smiled to herself and kept wiping the dish. Noticing. No reaction. Just that small, knowing smile. I found that I liked the quiet with her. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't forced. It was steady, grounding, familiar in a way that didn't make sense. When my friend finally came downstairs, I almost felt annoyed that our moment, simple as it was, had ended. I didn't understand why. I just knew the rhythm shattered, and I missed it instantly. As I left their house later that day, she walked me to the door. The evening light was dim, and her voice was soft when she said, "Have a good night." Nothing unusual, nothing bold. But I kept replaying the hours we spent, not as my friend's mom and me, but simply as two people who saw each other in the quiet. And that was the first time it truly scared me. Because quiet moments aren't supposed to feel that meaningful. Not with her. Not with someone I shouldn't be thinking about. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Just a phase, just misplaced attention, just loneliness wearing a different face. But lies have a short lifespan, and mine was already falling apart. The more I saw her, the more I noticed the shadows beneath her smile, the silence behind her laughter. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, but it was there, and suddenly I couldn't ignore it. One evening, I stopped by after class. My friend wasn't home yet, so she invited me in to wait. The house felt dimmer than usual, quieter, as if even the walls were tired. She sat at the kitchen table with a half-finished cup of tea, staring at nothing. When she finally looked up, she tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Long day?" I asked gently. She let out a soft breath and nodded. One of those days where you feel present in every room, but somehow invisible at the same time. She gave a small, self-aware laugh, as if trying to make light of her own admission. "Sorry, you didn't come here to hear that." The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. She wasn't venting. She wasn't fishing for sympathy. She was simply letting something slip. And for the first time, I saw not the composed woman I had always known, but a person, vulnerable, imperfect human. I sat down across from her. "I don't mind listening," I said, "if you want to talk." She hesitated, then looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me, really at me, as if deciding whether her truth was safe in my hands. And then, slowly, she opened up. Not everything, not all at once, but enough to reveal a loneliness she had become too used to. A life filled with responsibility, noise, and people, yet missing closeness. Missing someone who actually saw her. The room felt smaller, warmer, heavier. At one point, as she spoke, her voice trembled, not noticeably, just enough for me to feel it. Without thinking, I reached across the table and laid my hand over hers. It was instinct, not strategy. Connection, not impulse. Her hand still beneath mine. She didn't pull away. She didn't break eye contact. For a moment, the air between us felt fragile, like glass. One wrong movement, and everything would shatter. Her eyes softened, and I felt her thumb shift, brushing lightly against my finger. A touch so small, yet powerful enough to send a quiet ache through my chest. We both realized at the same time that something had changed. When my friend finally came home, she withdrew politely and stood up, her voice calm again, her walls back in place. But the moment had already been etched into both of us. That night, I lay awake replaying the feel of her hand beneath mine, the vulnerability in her eyes, and the silent plea I didn't know how to name. It was no longer just awareness, no longer just curiosity. Something real had cracked open between us, and neither of us could pretend it hadn't. After that night, everything felt different, too different. I tried to pretend nothing had changed, but my thoughts wouldn't obey me. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the softness of her hand beneath mine. The look she gave me, equal parts fragile and brave. It should have scared me away. Instead, it pulled me closer in ways I didn't know how to fight. So I did the only thing I could think of. I stayed away. Days passed, then a week, then almost 2. I ignored my friends' messages, avoided our usual hangouts, drowned myself in pointless distractions. I kept telling myself I needed space, that distance would shrink whatever dangerous thing had begun to grow between us. But the truth was harsher. I missed her. Not the house, not the routine, not the familiarity. Her. The sound of her voice. The calm in her eyes. The quiet understanding she offered without asking for anything in return. And missing her terrified me. I finally caved one evening and returned to their house, telling myself it was just to hang out like before. My friend let me in and ran upstairs to grab something. I waited in the living room, trying to look casual, but my pulse thudded in my ears. Then she walked in. She paused when she saw me, only for a second, but long enough for my breath to catch. There was no anger in her expression, no accusation, just a softness and a question I could feel even if she didn't voice it. "You disappeared," she said quietly. "I got busy," I lied. She didn't call me out, but she didn't accept it either. She stepped closer, folding her arms, not defensively, but protectively, as if holding herself together. "You don't have to run," she murmured. Her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't demanding. If anything, it sounded hurt. I swallowed hard. I wasn't running. "Yes," she said gently. "You were." Silence filled the space between us, thick, heavy, and impossibly intimate. My chest tightened under the weight of everything I wasn't saying. Finally, I exhaled. It got complicated, I admitted. She looked at me, really looked, and I could see the same turmoil reflected in her eyes. The same fear, the same pull, the same unspoken truth we both wished we didn't feel. Without thinking, I stepped closer. We were only inches apart now, close enough to feel the warmth of her, close enough that the air between us felt charged, dangerous, alive. Her voice lowered to barely a whisper. "We can't cross certain lines." "I know," I said, "but pretending they don't exist isn't working either." We stood there, suspended in a moment that felt too big for either of us to carry. No touch, no reckless move, just tension, raw, quiet, undeniable. Before anything more could be said, footsteps came from the hallway. She stepped back. I turned away, and just like that, the moment was over, but the truth lingered. We were already standing on the line, and both of us knew it was only a matter of time before one of us crossed it. The house felt different that night, too quiet, too still, as if it knew something was about to change. I hadn't planned to stay late, but hours passed without me noticing. My friend fell asleep on the couch in the middle of a movie, leaving just the two of us awake. She picked up a light blanket and covered him, brushing his hair back with a tenderness that made my chest ache. Then she looked at me. "You don't have to rush home," she said softly. "It's late. Sit for a bit." Her tone was calm, but there was something underneath it, something I didn't dare name. We ended up in the kitchen, the only light coming from the small lamp near the counter. She made tea for herself and poured me a glass of water. We sat across from each other, not saying much at first. It wasn't awkward. It was loaded, like we were both aware of a door between us, one we had been circling for weeks, afraid to open. Finally, she broke the silence. "You've been distant again." There was no anger in her voice, only concern, only curiosity, only care. I exhaled slowly. "I don't want to make things harder." Her eyes softened. "For who? For me? For you? Or for him?" The truth hovered in the space between us, waiting to be chosen or denied. "For everyone," I said quietly. She looked down at her hands, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Do you think I haven't asked myself the same questions?" Her voice trembled. Not much, just enough to reveal the emotion she usually kept hidden. "I'm not blind. I know what's happening. I know what you feel. I know what I feel. And I know we're both terrified of it." My heartbeat grew heavy in my chest. "Then why are we pretending nothing's changed?" She lifted her eyes to mine, and that was the moment everything thinned. The air, the distance, the excuses. "You always come here for him," she whispered. "But stay for me." The world seemed to stop on that line. It wasn't a confession shouted in passion. It wasn't reckless or impulsive. It was honest, bare, vulnerable. She wasn't asking for something wild or forbidden. She was asking not to be unseen, not to be an afterthought in her own life. I stood up, slowly, and walked around the table. She didn't move. I sat beside her, close but not too close. Her breath trembled as she looked forward, afraid to face me. Gently, I touched her hand. She didn't pull away. Her fingers curled into mine, hesitant but hopeful. No kiss, no rush, just a long, quiet moment with our foreheads almost touching, both of us breathing in the same fragile air, knowing we had crossed something invisible and irreversible. When I finally whispered, "I'm not going anywhere," she closed her eyes and let her head rest lightly on my shoulder. And in that quiet kitchen, beneath a single warm light, we stopped running, from the truth, from ourselves, and from each other. The morning after that night, everything felt both painfully clear and impossibly complicated. I woke up with her words echoing in my head. "You always come here for him, but stay for me." It should have felt wrong. Maybe it did, a little. But more than anything, it felt real, and that's what made it terrifying. I didn't see her for a few days after. My friend and I hung out as usual, but something between us felt uneven, unspoken. Every time I stepped inside that house, my eyes betrayed me, searching for her even before I knew I was doing it. When she wasn't there, relief mixed with disappointment. When she was, my chest tightened like I couldn't breathe, right? One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of her outside, tending to the small garden near the back porch. I hesitated, then walked over, pretending I just wanted to help. She didn't look surprised, almost as if she'd been expecting me. "You shouldn't be here right now," she said gently, without turning around. "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I wanted to be." She sighed, setting the watering can down. The sun hit her face just right, outlining her in light, but her expression was distant, sad, thoughtful. "You're young," she said softly. "You have your whole life ahead of you. You don't need this confusion." I stepped closer, trying to meet her eyes. "What if it's not confusion? Then it's danger," she whispered. "For you, for me, for everyone around us." Her words hurt, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I knew she was thinking of her son, my friend, of the whispers that could follow, of how fragile everything was. I understood her fear, but understanding didn't make it easier. "I don't care what people think," I said, maybe too fast, too desperate. "All I know is that something between us feels honest. Maybe it's wrong on paper, maybe it looks wrong from the outside, but it's real." She shook her head, but her eyes were already wet. "You think love is enough to protect us from the world? It isn't. I've lived long enough to know that." Silence hung between us, heavy as rain. And then, almost without realizing it, she stepped closer, not to bridge the gap, but to hold it, to look at me one last time in that trembling space where hearts speak louder than reason. "I can't be the one who ruins your peace," she said, "even if you think I'm part of it." Her voice cracked at the end, and that broke me. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her she wasn't ruining anything, that she was the calm I'd been searching for. But she turned away before I could speak. That night, I sat alone, replaying every word, every pause, every almost touch. And for the first time, I realized what real love demands. Not always staying, but sometimes stepping back. Still, deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Because no matter how far apart we drifted, part of me was already hers, quietly, permanently. Days turned into weeks, and what once felt like a private paradise slowly began to feel like a tightening circle. The sweetness of stolen moments with her was still there, still intoxicating, still capable of undoing him with a single touch or a lingering glance. But the world outside those moments had finally begun to notice. Silence, once a safety net, had become an accomplice. And secrets, no matter how carefully tended, have a way of demanding to be seen. Her son, his friend, was the first shift in the balance. At first, it was subtle, a questioning look, an unspoken suspicion, a silence that lasted a beat too long. Then came the distance. Fewer calls, shorter conversations. The effortless laughter that used to connect them felt forced, brittle. He could feel the friendship splintering under the weight of something that hadn't been confessed, but could already be felt. Guilt curled around him in ways even her warmth could not fully loosen. She felt it too. In the quiet of the evenings, when it was just the two of them and the world outside seemed to melt away, she would still pause, searching his face as if she was afraid of the answer to a question she hadn't asked aloud. "We can't keep hiding forever," she whispered one night, her voice steady but her eyes uncertain. He didn't answer immediately, because he knew she was right. The future, something they had both avoided defining, was finally standing in front of them, refusing to move aside. Was love enough? Was desire enough? Was wanting someone justification for breaking the world around them? He loved her. That much was undeniable. She had become a home he had never known he needed. But his friend was a brother to him. A constant. A history. A loyalty that wasn't so easily discarded. To choose her meant tearing that bond at its roots. To walk away from her meant living with a longing that would never dissolve, something that would follow him into every room, every season, every year that came after. She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes, eyes that held both strength and fear. "Whatever happens next," she murmured, "it has to be your choice. Not guilt's, not fear's, yours." For the first time, he saw her not as an escape, not as a fantasy, not even as a forbidden story. He saw her as a woman who was ready to pay the price for what they had built, no matter how the world judged her. The question was he strong enough to do the same? The unraveling had begun. What came next would define everything: love, loyalty, friendship, identity, and the truth of who he was becoming. And there was no path forward that would leave everyone whole. But that's the nature of undeniable love. Someone always breaks. The only choice left was who and for what.